Well, welcome everybody to today's event. We're so delighted to see everybody here and to welcome Hyeyoung Kwon and to hear from Hyeyoung about their book, Language Brokers, Children of Immigrants Translating Inequality and Belonging for Their Family. My name is Erin Hamilton. I am an affiliate of the UC Davis Global Migration Center, and I've been really happy to join with the San Diego Center for Comparative Immigration Studies and the UCLA Center for the Study of International Migration and the UC Berkeley Berkeley Interdisciplinary Migration Initiative to help organize this ongoing Zoom book series event. And we're just so delighted today to have Hyeyoung Kwon from Indiana University in Bloomington. Hyeyoung earns their PhD in sociology from the University of Southern California and is a scholar of race, immigration, families, gender, children and youth, and qualitative research. After Hyeyoung presents for about, I think 30 to 40 minutes, is that about right? About the book, then we will hear from Inmaculada Garcia Sanchez, who is a professor of education at UCLA, who will offer some comments. And then we will open it to Q&A. If you have a question anytime during the presentation, feel free to put it in the Q&A part of the Zoom app. And then once we get to the Q&A session, we can raise hands or kind of call on people as they turn on their videos. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Hyeyoung, and please ask everybody to join me in welcoming Hyeyoung today to talk about their book, Language Brokers. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to join you all for this virtual meeting, especially since I grew up in California and did my research for the book that I'll be discussing today, Language Brokers, Children of Immigrants Translating Inequality and Belonging for Their Families. So based on my findings, I'm going to take you inside the lives of working class children who serve as language brokers. I'm going to demonstrate that translation for these young people is much more than simple verbal exchanges. For these children who are marginalized by multiple forms of inequality, translating is often an attempt at resolving structural problems and securing basic social citizenship rights that help guarantee health, safety, and overall well-being. In a time marked by racialized nativism and shrinking social safety net, I'm going to argue that dichotomous understanding of undeserving versus deserving immigrants embedded in institutional practices, wider culture, and everyday interactions shape how young people cultivate belonging for their families. So today, nearly a quarter of US children have at least one immigrant parent, and 2/3 of these children's parents primarily speak a language other than English. Despite this number, US institutions rarely offer sufficient translation services for individuals who primarily speak a language other than English. As a result, many bilingual children of immigrants become language brokers, acting as communication liaisons between their parents and other English-speaking adults, including teachers, landlords, doctors, and police officers. Young people's translation work has received considerable attention in the media. As Marjorie Oriana demonstrated in her book, reporters often criticize immigrant families for flipping the normalized parent-child hierarchy. You can see this in headlines such as growing up too fast, kids have too much to lose, innocence lost. Assuming that young people are inherently incompetent due to their age, experts quoted in these stories, ranging from family therapists, social workers, and educators, often claim that young people lack the ability to correctly translate adult conversation. Indeed, the sensationalized depiction of language brokers reveal a lot about the assumptions we have about young people. They're often depicted as problematic, passive, naive, or merely adults in the making. As a result, even when the focus of this article is on the lives of young people, they often leave out perspectives of young people who are doing this type of work. Furthermore, this account overlooked the structural condition and systematic inequalities that prompt young people to begin serving as language brokers in the first place. Instead, these stories tend to focus mainly on what people, sometimes immigrant parents, are doing wrong. Without the context, some people criticize parents for not speaking English. I've seen comments on stories about young people, youth brokering, that says something like, this all could be avoided by parents not being lazy and learning how to speak the English language. If you want to come here, live in life in America, become an American. That means knowing English. Clearly, scholars studying immigrant youth recognize that popular stories and newspaper articles focused on language brokers paint an incomplete and misunderstanding of what it is really like to grow up in an immigrant family. At the same time, when immigration scholars does focus on young people, it often follows a long-standing tradition of examining whether and how they assimilate into the United States or how they become American. By implicitly comparing how similar or different children of immigrants are in comparison to the mainstream, assimilation theory has pushed the fundamental notion of resistance and intersecting inequality into the background, thus undermining power dynamics at play and the agency that young people strategically exercise in navigating their social worlds. If we assume children of immigrants are active social agents, then they might actively perform or challenge dominant meanings of Americans on a daily basis, regardless of whether they personalize, internalize these views. So how then do we study the lives of young people, especially children of immigrants from those who are living at the intersection of multiple forms of inequality beyond the scope of assimilation? With that, I'm going to just turn to literature review. I'm going to draw from multiple and interdisciplinary body of work, including citizenship and intersectionality, as well as sociology of childhood and culture. So first, at the heart of this discussion is the concept of citizenship, which plays a central role in shaping people's lives through state-sanctioned forms of exclusion and inclusion. Citizenship includes civil rights, such as property ownership, individual freedoms, and political rights, like voting and governance participation. But citizenship rights extends beyond legal rights. As Evelyn O'Connor-Glenn argues, it is a matter of belonging, which requires recognition by other members of the community.
Ahí, entonces, sí, es algo muy, muy profesional, muy.
It is also a matter of belonging, and it also includes social citizenship, or Nancy Fraser and Linda Gordon refer to as guarantee of social provision or rights as full members of society entitled to equal respect. Although rarely discussed in the United States and treated as handouts, social citizenship involves
Es
access
algo
to
muy,
social
muy especializado, puede
institutions
ser muy, muy bonito.
and resources that uphold dignity, security, and belonging. This includes basic social rights, such as protection from law enforcement, access to healthcare, fair wages, and public benefits. Without state-sanctioned support, people in the US are often left searching for a private solution to social problems. The US is notorious for its lack of comprehensive safety net, including universal health care, basic income, paid family leave, public child care, elder care, and nationwide rent control. As a result, parents and adult children spend significant time and resources caring for children and aging parents. Indeed, sociologists have long examined how adults, especially mothers, develop individual level solutions to prevent structural problems for jeopardizing their family's well-being. This is especially true in the case of immigrant families of color, where families rely on fictive kinship, split households, or patchwork work of pooling various resources and protective caregiving to shield children from systematic injustices. Whereas all this research that I talked about focused mostly on adults, especially mothers, growing scholarship, starting with Marjorie Orellana's groundbreaking work on children of Latinx immigrants, show that young people use their bilingual skills to open up access to essential services, navigate institutions, even support small businesses and informal economies. As Garcia Sanchez describes, they serve as interactional brokers of care, actively shaping their family's well-being and connection to the broader society. So building on this work, I propose that limited citizenship rights available to immigrant families of color create contexts where young people use their position to secure social citizenship and belonging for their families. At the same time, scholars theorizing concept of citizenship has shown that citizenship is not solely a site of exclusion, but also a space where marginalized people contest social hierarchies through everyday interaction and discourses. Scholars of intersectionality, for example, also argue that inequality do not operate independently, but rather race, class, and gender intersect to shape people's experiences, reflecting broader system of structural oppression. But living at the intersection of multiple systems of inequality also allows people to produce but often subjugated framework for understanding the world. As Bell Hook powerfully noted, the margins are more than a site of deprivations, which allows subordinated people to look both from outside in and from the inside out. Patricia Hill Collins described this as outside within position. W.E. Du Bois famously called it double consciousness. Whereas intersectionality scholars have focused on adults, scholars within the subfield of sociology of childhood have repeatedly demonstrated that age is also an important axis of inequality too. By virtue of their age, young people know that they are perceived as inherently inferior and lack the rights and access that adults often have. Moving beyond the biological deterministic understanding of age, however, sociologists of children and youth have shown that youth are reflective and knowledgeable actors who strategize within their constraints and make a profound difference in their surroundings and in their family's life. Finally, shifting away from viewing children as passive recipients of cultural values requires moving away from this culture as a fixed and unified systems. So whereas assimilation theories tend to focus on culture as values that young people internalize or reject, I draw from sociology of culture that theorize culture as repertoires and toolkits to show how young people actively and selectively use culture to assert belonging and frame their families as deserving. So taken together, language brokers challenge this idea that children are passive recipients of American values. By bringing intersectionality theory into conversation with the sociology of childhood and culture, I show that young people awareness of their multiple marginalized position allows them to covertly resist the inequality that threaten their family's social citizenship. Through their interactional and discursive strategy, they not only navigate but also at times challenge dominant and cultural narrative about American identities, including ideal of proper childhood, normal families, and good immigrants to assert their belonging. To examine how young people navigate this inequality, I conducted in-depth interviews with 80 working class Mexican and Korean American language brokers. My book also draw from 6 months of ethnography research in Southern California police station, and then interviews with 23 healthcare providers who work with language brokers and non-English speaking immigrants on a daily basis. I'm happy to talk about these findings during Q&A, but I'm going to focus on interviews with language brokers today. Among children with parents from Mexico or Korea, two of the largest groups of immigrants in the United States, a respective 81% and 76% children have a parents who can't speak English. Mexican and Korean Americans also present theoretically interesting case because they are differently racialized in the United States. Today, popular discourses fueled by nativist panic currently construct Mexican Americans as problematic foreigners, while constructing Koreans as successful foreigners, irrespective of their class status. Although Mexican and Korean Americans endure seemingly different racialization processes that depict the former as bad foreigners and latter as the successful foreigners, it is important to note that both groups are not seen as real Americans, or even worse, depicted as potential threats to economic stabilities and security of quote-unquote true Americans. By examining the lives of Mexican Korean Americans from similar socioeconomic backgrounds, I show young people's group position in the contemporary racial hierarchy shapes their strategies of resistance. I interview young people in Los Angeles, where 49% of Latinx and 15% of Asian Americans live. With 83% of Latinx and 76% of Asian Americans speaking languages other than English, one might assume that language resources are easily accessible. But despite the California Bilingual Service Act mandating bilingual service since 1973, audits continuously show that most local agencies in LA fail to comply with the federal and state language accessibility law, compelling families, including children, to step in as the language brokers. To recruit language brokers, I visited community organizations serving low-income high school students and distributed the flyers in schools, colleges, churches, and parks across Los Angeles. About 120 bilingual children of immigrants expressed interest, and participants were screened through a background survey, and social class was assessed based on lunch program eligibility and parental education, occupation, and home ownership. So let me share just a little bit about the young people that I spoke with. If anyone has questions about my methodology, feel free to ask me later. But just to highlight some of the key points, over 90% of the parents in both groups work low-wage service jobs, qualify for free or reduced lunch, and non-owner homes. In other words, I purposely talked to the children who were coming from low-income families where they were struggling to maintain family survival. Let me now take you inside experiences of language brokers I spoke with. I'm going to start by introducing you to two representative interviewees whose stories reflect the challenges faced by many working class Korean and Mexican Americans that I talked to. Through their stories, you will see how these young people were very aware of inequalities they faced during translation encounters. I'm going to then show you how they creatively use their marginality to challenge common ideas about American youth and secure basic social rights for their parents. So Changmi is a 17-year-old Korean American youth. She came to Los Angeles when she was 8 years old. Raised in the United States, Changmi speaks English fluently and always translate for her parents. Like the vast majority of youth I spoke with, she told me it was her family responsibility. When I asked her to list all the places that translates for her, she said, "Oh my gosh, are you serious? Like everywhere you can think of. Let's see." She then started listing locations: the DMV, the doctor's office, school, the police station, the immigration office, the bank, the social security office, and Macy's. Chongmi sometimes spoke on the phone with their landlord as well as agents from car insurance, credit card, cable companies. Although her parents used to ask her to translate for them, she had gradually started taking on many of these tasks without explicitly being asked. For example, she said that she usually opens their family's mail because it was easier for her to just take care of them. Tomi's responsibility did not stop here. Since her parents toiled long hours in the service industry to scrape together a modest living, Hemi began assuming additional domestic labors at home. She often lent helping hand to siblings, assisting their homework and preparing simple meals. But in the process of translating, Chongmi, like many working class children I talked to, learned about their parents' financial struggles. For example, when her mother was laid off, Chongmi said that she called unemployment agency for her mother. She said, "I had to find out everything about my mom, like how much money is in her account, why she got laid off." Jungmi knew that her mother would rather hide such information from her, but because she needed Jungmi to translate, she learned about their financial struggles anyways. Jungmi had also recently filed a police report for her dad after someone had illegally used his credit card and social security information. She said, "I wanted to do everything I could." True to her word, Jungmi has spent hours assembling evidence to demonstrate that her father was working at the time when the fraudulent transaction occurred. Jungmi sounded confident and proud when she said, "I don't take no as an answer. I'm known as the fighter in the family because I have to get what I want. It's money issues." Just 5 blocks away from Jungmi's home, I met Eduardo, 14 years old American whose family faced severe financial struggles. His mother, a garment worker, spent long hours hunched over a sewing machine, yet they still struggle to afford electricity or food. Eduardo recalled taking her to ER one time when her severe back pain left her unable to stand. Translating, he explained that she had endured years of pain but avoided treatment due to cost. When the doctor recommended bi-weekly physical therapy, Eduardo masked his frustration. He knew that his mother's job would not offer pay leave, making treatment impossible. Like Chongmi, Eduardo's experience with translating exposed his family's struggle. A few weeks prior to mom's hospital visit, she asked him to inquire about unexpected fees on bank account. He found out that they were overdraft charges, and a glance at her deposit showed that just how little money she had. He said, I could not believe that my mom did not have any money in her bank account. He said, but I never asked why. These were not the only time the bilingual children like and Eduardo had given a glimpse of into parents' struggle. A few weeks prior, he translated an eviction notice. They only to find out that building was being demolished by a developer. Soon after other tenants, knowing Eduardo as smart bilingual kid, started knocking on his door for help with their notices. But Jongmi and Eduardo found it tough to balance family and school during crisis situations, often needing to drop everything to help their parents when issues like medical emergency or legal problems occurred. Jongmi spent hours at police station with their fathers after his identity was stolen, while Eduardo missed school to take his injured mom to ER. But both reported that they felt inadequate sometimes. And yet, this did not mean that they were ever considered declining their parents' request. Indeed, when I asked Chongmi if she had ever considered telling her parents no, she looked at me like I was up from a different planet. She said, no, because they're my parents. Her voice rose as she said, I love them. Plus, if I don't go with them, people are going to think that my parents are dumb. Chongmi recalled a painful experience at a Target when women yelled at her mother to go back to China over a misunderstanding in line. The cashier was also rude, she said. She was very short with her, snapping at her, and asked when she was asking about a price. Reflecting on the moment, she said, I think my mom's mannerism or my mom's mannerism or broken English make people think that she's stupid. I felt bad and angry. Eduardo also said the same thing when I asked the same question. He said, of course not. I feel that people look down on my mom because she can't speak English. I feel bad. I get angry. So at first, the financial struggles young people describe can seem to merely reflect individual hardships. But one can miss the forest for the trees by characterizing parents' financial problems as personal struggles. Many working class immigrant parents face mounting debt, eviction notices, and job insecurity while working long hours in low-wage jobs. Their children, especially girls, took on family work, quote unquote family work, including caring for siblings due to lack of affordable childcare. Privatized housing left many without stable and habitable homes. Yet schools upheld class and ethnocentric expectations, assuming that children have ample time to study for their tests or have a mother shouldering care work for them, thus making young people feel inadequate. Policies ensuring living wages, rent control, and job security could provide stability. Meanwhile, young brokers actively tackle these structural barriers, helping parents with unemployment forms, bank fees, landlord negotiation to secure basic social rights for their families. But as reflected in this story, they came across not only class inequality, but also age inequality. Because they were children in the eyes of adult authority, they said that they sometimes felt powerless and also constrained and frustrated. They also came across what historians George Sanchez call racialized nativism or antagonism and hostility aimed at racially identifiable immigrants on the basis of their perceived foreignness. So I'm going to talk about some of the strategies now that they developed during their translation interactions. By talking about this strategy, I'm going to show that children of immigrants do not simply internalize American values or just become American. Rather, they enact and contest dominant meanings of American, or what I call doing Americans from the outsider within position to navigate multiple social inequalities. In this process, they reproduce but also challenge the dominant meanings of American. Children of immigrants enacted and perform what it means to be American by using phone or English fluency when they can. So I met Vincent, a tall, dark-skinned 17-year-old Mexican youth at a park, where he described frequent racial profilings, especially when accompanying his father to work in wealthy neighborhoods. This experience was common among Mexican Americans. Unlike Korean American counterparts, they were far more likely to call moments when their parents were perceived as a criminal, illegal, lazy, and etc. So one incident in particular stood out to Vincent. After spotting his dream home, he, with a large for rent sign, he called the leasing office and was greeted warmly. But when he arrived with his parents, the same manager suddenly claimed that the unit was taken, despite the sign still hanging outside. Frustrated, Vincent devised a plan. He scheduled an apartment viewing over the phone, but sent his light-skinned younger sister with their parents instead. Unlike him, she did not encounter an issue, and his family secured these days after. So he was right that the unit was available. Like other language brokers, Vincent's outsider within status enable him to see how race intersects with gender to shape everyday interactions. As a result, he often used phone to erase racialized masculinity, which casts men of color as violent criminals. Born in the United States, Vincent spoke English better than Spanish, and his deep voice made it easier for him to pretend to be his father over the phone. He said, like I said, people think I'm a cholo, but I don't sound like one. I sound American on the phone. Another strategy that I have identified is shielding, or performing emotional labor to appear friendly and professional American while protecting families from exploitation and racialized nativism. At the beginning of interviews, young people claim that they try their best to translate everything when trying to access resources. Upon probing further, there were a number of occasions where young people deliberately censor or filter conversation to protect their parents from racialized nativism and exploitation. Macarena, a 19-year-old Mexican American, translated for her mother as she cleaned houses. While most clients were friendly and sometimes she encountered demanding, cheap, or rude clients who treated her mothers as if she were dumb, and also pushing for extra unpaid work. Though this encounter really angered her, Macarena, like other youths, avoided confrontational to protect her mother's job. She said, I can't tell them they're being abusive, she explained. I just repress my anger. I try to calm down and act friendly even when they're racist toward my mom. Macarena found subtle ways to push back, however. She strategically omitted parts of her mother's offer, ensuring that these rude clients knowingly pay more. She said, if my mom says she will clean inside out for free, I don't translate that. I just say, I'll give them discount. Language brokers like Macarena struggle to stay composed when witnessing their parents' exploitations, especially in low-wage jobs. In other words, they engage in what Arlie Hochschild called emotional labor to manage their feelings, appear friendly and professional. At the same time, their marginal status granted them a sharper awareness of social hierarchies. Knowing that immigrant women of color are often seen as submissive, she used her double consciousness, charging more for what she called undeserving clients. Unlike privileged English-speaking adults, bilingual youth use their linguistic skill to covertly resist exploitations. As outsider within, they shielded their parents and covertly resisted this social hierarchy at the same time. So now I'm going to move on to talk about some of the ways in which people use cultural repertoire to really make sense of and respond to exclusion. So far I talked about interactional strategy, but I'm going to move on to discursive strategy. So in addition to using interaction strategy, children also selectively deploy cultural repertoires about good immigrants to construct their right kind of family or child to claim membership in a society that excluded their lived experiences, or what I call inclusion work. This work varied by race, with Mexican American youth drawing on broader range of good immigrant narratives to challenge negative depictions of their families. One way young people show their family is a good immigrants by highlighting their family collectivity, a trait they use to position their family as better than the typical American family. By claiming these values, which are highly praised in the United States as part of their own culture, they push back against stereotype that their families were a burden or a threat. For example, I met Sam, 16 years old Korean American, who criticized white children for being selfish or individualistic for not helping their parents. He said, we don't do that. Koreans value family ties because we are very collective. So there are a lot of Korean morals this translating reminds me of, like respecting our parents and prioritizing family. This perception of American families weakening in family ties is widespread in the United States, often linked to model minority narrative about Asian filial commitment. Although problematic, the dominant cultural narrative provided this powerful framework for Korean Americans to construct their family as not only normal, but superior to American families whom they view as excessively individualistic or selfish. Many Mexican Americans also use presumed collectivity to really try to push back on this idea that their families are deviant. Unlike Korean American family, they also pair this work, collectivity idea of collectivity with the notion of hard work. This distinction stems from different types of contact Mexican Americans and Korean Americans had in my studies with white families. Unlike Korean Americans who were more likely to interact with white children in school, Mexican Americans often attended schools in Latinx majority neighborhoods. Consequently, their primary interaction with white people occurred during translation when they were trying to work in suburban areas, kind of highlighting really racial and socioeconomic inequality. For example, so Francisca, a 19-year-old Mexican American, followed her mother to translate while cleaning houses in a wealthy neighborhood. She explained that American children never have to work hard. They have everything. That's not very good. Then they don't develop any motivation to succeed in life. Comparing American families with their own, Francisca said, Mexican families are different. My parents put us all before themselves and work day in, day out, long nights to maintain us and keep a roof over our heads. We were brought up to work hard, make our family our priority. In a society where Mexican Americans are often seen as free riders or lazy, Francisca, like other Mexican American youth, flipped this stereotype. Drawing from their experience of translating for their moms and dad employed by white Americans in wealthy Los Angeles, they actually portray white children as lacking the work ethic that Mexican Americans had. So let me now kind of close by revisiting how people perceive language brokers and immigrants of color more broadly. So when I discuss my research with English-speaking adults outside of immigrant families, I often hear concerns that mirror mainstream narratives, that translation makes children grow up too fast, undermines parental authority, or harms their development. Since English fluency is often equated with assimilation, some even insist that parents should just learn English to avoid this type of role reversal. These anxieties are reflected in policies like Donald Trump's executive order declaring English the official language of the US, a first in the nation's history. While framed as a way to promote unity and quote-unquote share American culture, it was ultimately designed to restrict language assistance programs for immigrants who speak a language other than English, reinforcing exclusion under the guise of national identity. Debates over children's language brokering reveal deeper anxieties about who qualifies as a good family, immigrant, and citizen, ultimately exposing unexamined assumptions about who deserves both rights in American society. Young people in this study often felt this anxiety and hostility during translation interaction. They repeatedly said that their parents, especially their mothers, were treated like a kid, stupid, or alien for not speaking English. Furthermore, considering that Mexican Americans are racialized as belonging to problematic foreigners, Mexican American youth also often recall situations where their families were perceived as lazy, criminal, low educated, wetback, or illegal. In other words, monolingual immigrants of color became walking target of racialized nativism. Despite experiencing racialized nativism, language brokers actively tackle these structural problems related to poverty, racism, and sexism to secure basic social rights for their families, showing how citizenship is both a side of exclusion, but also a side of contestation. Rather than passively accepting or rejecting American values, they were doing American or strategically enacting what it means to be American from an outsider within position by speaking standard, quote unquote, standard English to passive American adults and subtly shaping conversation to ensure their parents appear professional and friendly, traits often associated with being truly American. They creatively leverage their position to secure vital resources for their families. They also engage in inclusion work, drawing on cultural repertoires about good immigrants to assert their family's belonging. Aware that their differences from hegemonic understanding of American families, they use seemingly positive traits such as being hardworking and family-oriented to counter negative depictions. Mexican American youth in particular employ a broader range of these strategies. Marginalized young people attempt at normalizing their families' experiences really speak to the ubiquity of controlling images that construct that their family as burden or perpetual foreigners in the United States. Inclusion work, in other words, should be understood as a response to exclusion work. Although children of immigrants exercise enormous agency and sometimes gain access to institutional resources, it is important to note that children were accountable to normalize the meaning of American during everyday interactions, which served to exclude them in the first place. Although their efforts furthermore, their efforts also inevitably reinforce dominant narratives of good versus bad immigrants, underscoring really the limits of resistance within the exclusionary system. In other words, citizenship remains an elusive status, requiring continuously effort to prove their worthiness. Until systematic barriers are addressed, and we kind of provide them with different vocabulary to brokering citizenship and belonging, they will continue to perform American and engage in inclusion work. Although children of immigrants saw brokering as a family responsibility, their efforts were response to institutional failure that denied them social citizenship, the right to a dignified life and full belonging. If we truly care about their well-being, including children of immigrants, the state, not individuals, must be held responsible for resolving structural problems language brokers are currently trying to resolve. This means providing better access to social provision, such as healthcare, safe and affordable housing, childcare, livable wage, and paid sick leave to all. Social provision is not charity or handout. It is fundamental rights for all people to receive basic rights such as security, protection, well-being, and dignity. At the same time, we must treat young people's social location at the margin of language, race, class as a special place of strength. Marginalized youth's worldview derived from their particular social location can potentially affect change beyond their families when they become activists or teachers and social workers. In fact, it was from her own outsider within status that Patricia Cullen produced Black Feminist Thought, a theoretical framework that has profoundly shaped the study of sociology as a discipline. Education also plays a vital role in equipping young people with the tools to understand language like imperialism, colonialism, and racialized capitalism, really pushing beyond this good immigrant narrative to confront systemic inequalities. Despite ongoing attacks that we're all facing today, providing young people with critical knowledge remains essential for driving meaningful change. There's much that we can learn from young people's experience of translating multiple and intersecting forms of inequality. Their attempt at brokering belonging for their families not only illuminate the contradiction that undergird our national identity, but also the disjuncture between our nation's own belief about equality and its actual practice of exclusion. Translating their experiences into lasting change requires all of us to look not individuals or families, but broader system, institutions, and interactions in which all groups are embedded, but have a particular ramification for young people living at the margins. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hyeyoung. I'm Roger Waldinger, Professor of Sociology at UCLA and Director of the Center for the Study of International Migration. I'm going to take over moderating the remainder of this session. So we will now turn the floor over to Professor Inma Garcia-Sanchez, who is Professor of Education and Associate Director of the Center for the Study of International Migration. Inma, floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So thank you, Roger, and thank you, Hyeyoung. I have to start by saying that I've been a fan of Dr. Kwon's scholarship since she first burst onto the academic scene over 10 years ago, writing about immigrant child language brokers. And even though we have never met in person before, our citation patterns indicate that we've been following each other's publications and ideas on topics we both care about very much. And so it is a real pleasure to be here today, commenting on her book and engaging with her more directly, and I'm grateful for the invitation. Sadly for me, I only have 10 minutes to discuss this richly textured comparative work. And I took a lot of notes when I was reading, but I will only have time to address a tiny fraction of them. So let's get into it. Last night, as I was winding down and getting ready to go to sleep, I thought I would catch up with the news of the day that had queued up on my feed. And please don't ask me why I did that or whether I was trying to induce a state of night terrors. But one of the articles that immediately caught my eye was an LA Times article reporting how California was considering cuts after expanding Medicare to all immigrants, regardless of their legal status. Even more disappointing and depressing than the journalistic coverage of the issue, and yes, also sadly very predictable, were the comments. Very callous, calling for mass deportations and reproducing, in many cases, almost verbatim. That's why it's so striking to me, the decades-long, enduring, controlling images of immigrants, using Dr. Kwon's words, who is citing Patricia Hill Collins, as drains on state resources, as undeserving, etc. So this article in yesterday's newspaper not only puts in sharp relief how incredibly timely and necessary Dr. Kwon's book is, but it also perfectly encapsulates the political and economic context of heightened racialized nativism and racial capitalism, in which youth like Young-mi, Jacob, Eduardo, Vincent, or Maria have to do their important work. And the very clear-eyed awareness that young immigrant child language brokers have of this political and economic context. Dr. Kwon's book succinctly discusses bringing together in a new light two paradoxes well known to those of us who have been researching and writing about immigrant child language brokers for years. So the first paradox has to do with the invisibilization of the labor provided by child language brokers at a time when neoliberal labor conditions and economic policies have been a catalyst for children increasingly finding themselves having to act as child language brokers. So on the one hand, the economic policies of neoliberal globalization, including aggressive deregulation, massive transfer of cheap natural resources from the global south to the global north, and access to cheap exploitative labor, as well as the political crisis and conflicts that these policies offer and engender, have been pivotal in promoting large global migration flows of new economic migrants and refugees, insofar as these policies have magnified inequalities between the North and the South and within developing countries. On the other hand, the neoliberal impact on conditions in the local economies of immigration receiving countries have led to boom-bust cycles, economic crises, casualization of labor, austerity measures of varying severity, and deepening international economic inequalities with the subsequent political resentment and scapegoating of immigrants that we see now in almost all of the US and in all over Europe today as well. So social services meeting the needs of immigrant communities in receiving countries have been greatly impacted by these changing local economic and political conditions. This is even more the case for translation and interpretation services, which are among the most vulnerable to shrinking budgets and austerity measures. While immigration activists and scholars like us tend to view these as critical to facilitating access to basic services such as health, education, employment, and other social services to ameliorate the exclusionary effect of bureaucratic language, another form of linguistic and structural inequalities, these services tend to be considered by the general public as the most superfluous, since from an assimilationist standpoint, as Dr. Kwon rightly points to in her book, these barriers would be at best temporary while immigrant families acquire the dominant language or languages of the receiving area. So what we are observing right now is that at a time of high volume of new migration, a climate of economic austerity, and dare I say, government efficiency, and heightened political resentment for new immigrants and refugees, the provision of language services is more jeopardized than ever. And as Dr. Kwon documents and describes, particularly in chapter 2, even in a place like liberal California, where there are policies to ensure the provision of institutional language services to a speaker of threshold languages, the children of immigrants have to step into these roles, filling the vacuum with an almost total lack of formal or institutional recognition. And this, of course, and Dr. Kwon was just talking about this, is going to get worse after the current president's executive order designating English as the official language of the United States. But why won't institutions recognize the children of immigrants as regular and important providers of institutional language services? After all, like the work of scholars like Rachele Antonini, for example, a colleague from the University of Bologna in Italy, has shown, it would actually take relatively few resources to provide meaningful structures of support that would make a real difference to children who are doing this kind of work routinely in institutions, if only the institutions and the institutional agents were willing to recognize that children are engaging in this form of linguistic labor. And of course, this is where the second paradox comes in, which focuses on the intersection between ideologies of normative childhoods, normative, and racialized class ideas about immigrant children and their families. In Dr. Kwon's book, we see and hear law enforcement and healthcare workers greatly relied on child labor as language brokers. However, invoking tropes of normalized childhoods, which are race and class coded, the institution simultaneously spoke out against the practice in a way that pathologized it, as psychologically damaging parentification, and as a reversal that gives children too much power, despite the mounting evidence that there are many beneficial developmental outcomes for immigrant children who regularly act as language brokers, which Dr. Kwon also discusses in the book, and that I will refer to later. So this pathologization is common and resonated strongly with my own ethnographic practice in educational and medical institutions in Spain, where school administrators and doctors, while to different degrees, also express very negative views of immigrant children's involvement in any kind of interpreting activity, and routinely spoke out against the practice of child language brokering as abnormal. However, and I'm now moving more centrally to what I think are the contributions of the book, Dr. Kwon's book provides luminous